The marble walls of the house chamber seemed to trap the tension, bouncing it back into the air until it hummed like an electric current. Every seat was filled, committee members at their benches, aides scribbling notes, journalists clutching their recorders. Even the interns had stopped pretending to shuffle papers, their eyes locked on the witness table where Donald Trump sat, arms relaxed, posture loose, as if the weight of the hearing could not touch him. The cameras panned across his face, catching the small, knowing smile that curled at the corner of his mouth. He leaned forward, microphone catching the low rumble of his voice. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said, letting the name linger like he was tasting it for the first time. "I admire your enthusiasm, but maybe you should leave the serious work to those with more experience. You know, stick to the TV. Interviews, you're much better at those." It was measured, deliberate, and surgical. Not a spontaneous quip, but a strike carefully aimed at her credibility. The words carried the scent of the old playbook. Diminish the opponent before they ever get to the question. For a second, the room seemed to stall. Reporters looked up from their laptops, fingers frozen over keyboards. There was a sharp intake of breath from somewhere in the gallery. A Republican member 2 seats down allowed himself the faintest smirk. The insult had landed. Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. Her posture remained upright, her gaze locked directly on him, unblinking. But her fingers, resting lightly on the thick file before her, curled almost imperceptibly against the paper. The slightest flex of muscle betrayed that she'd heard every syllable. She didn't respond. Not yet. From the viewing public's perspective, it was a momentary pause, a beat of silence before business resumed. But inside the room, the stillness felt heavier, deliberate. The air seemed to tighten, each breath measured. Even Trump, whose confidence usually swelled after a well-placed jab, seemed to register the absence of an immediate reaction. Somewhere behind the rows of reporters, a camera lens zoomed in, catching Crockett's eyes, dark, steady, almost unreadable. That image would later circulate across social media, framed with captions about restraint, power, and patience. But right now, in this instant, the silence was her weapon. She flipped open the file in front of her, not rushing, not breaking eye contact. Her voice didn't come, not yet. The message was unspoken, but unmistakable. She would respond on her own terms. And when she did, it wouldn't be with an insult. It would be with something far more dangerous. No one in the room knew yet that. They had just witnessed the first frame of the day's defining moment. Before the gavel fell again, before the questions began, before the country decided whose version of events it believed, this was the strike that set everything into motion. What Trump thought would be a small humiliation was about to become the slow, precise dismantling of his own defense, and Jasmine Crockett was about to write the opening lines. Asterisk, the hearing had been announced weeks in advance, but the real anticipation had been building for months. Washington lived on schedules and rumors, and this particular Oversight Committee session had both in abundance. The official docket read like any other. Questions on misuse of presidential privileges, campaign finance irregularities, and breaches of federal ethics codes. But behind the formal phrasing, everyone knew the true draw. Donald J. Trump, compelled to appear in person, an occurrence rare enough to guarantee wall-to-wall media coverage. The chamber itself carried the weight of history. Tall marble columns framed the raised dais where the chair presided. Brass nameplates gleamed under the white glare of overhead lights, each one marking the seat of a lawmaker who would, for the next several hours, hold the power to question the former president directly. Above it all, the Great Seal of the United. States looked down from the wall, an unblinking reminder of the authority that transcended any single man or party. Jasmine Crockett arrived early, her steps deliberate, her expression unreadable. She wore the same calm armor she had in countless prior hearings, but her mind was alive, calculating. She knew what this appearance meant for Trump, and she knew what it could mean for her. The seating arrangement placed Trump squarely in the center, flanked by his legal counsel. On either side of the witness table, stacks of binders and documents hinted at the hours of preparation each side had poured into the day. Aides shifted in their seats, whispering updates, passing folded notes that disappeared into suit pockets. What most Americans watching from home couldn't see, and what everyone in the room could feel, was the undercurrent. There were members who had no love for Trump, but feared the political cost of confronting him directly. Others were eager to land their blows, but lacked the skill or evidence to make them stick. And then there was Crockett, a freshman in title, whose meticulous questioning style had earned her both grudging respect and open resentment. Trump's allies had not been idle in the run-up to this day. Sources in the press corps whispered about a strategy meeting days earlier, in which it was decided that the best way to weaken Crockett's line of questioning was not to challenge her facts, but to undermine her presence, rattle her. One aide had reportedly said, "Make her react, and she'll lose her rhythm." The plan was simple: goad her into stepping out of the calm precision that made her so effective. From her place at the committee table, Crockett could hear the faint click of cameras being adjusted, the scuff of polished shoes against the floor as reporters leaned forward. Every movement felt amplified. When the gavel fell, the sound cracked through the chamber like a starter. Pistol. The chair recognized the first member to speak, and the hearing began in earnest. But somewhere in the back of the room, a journalist scribbled a note in the margin of their legal pad. Today it won't be about policy. It'll be about who controls the room. Asterisk. Trump had been in this position enough times to know the rhythms of a hearing, the pacing, the build, the way members cycled in and out, some wasting their allotted minutes on grandstanding, others fumbling through papers to find their questions. He'd learned long ago that the easiest way to win the room wasn't through policy or detail. It was through dominance. As the chair moved through the roll of questioners, his eyes tracked the table until they landed on Jasmine Crockett. She was halfway down the list, her file open, pen resting neatly in the crease. She didn't look at him yet, but he noticed the stillness, the kind that came before a strike. He leaned back in his chair, the edges of his suit coat pulling slightly as he settled in. When her name was called, he leaned forward again, a subtle shift that placed his face inches closer to the microphone. The smirk was there, just faint enough to be mistaken for casual confidence. "Congresswoman," he began, drawing the word out like a slow hand pulling a curtain, "I admire your enthusiasm." The pause after the word was deliberate, an opening for the faintest ripple of laughter from his allies on the dais. "But perhaps this isn't the place for amateur theatrics. Maybe try cable news instead. You'd get more applause there." It was a surgical strike. Not about policy, not even about her line of questioning. It was about casting her as unserious before she spoke a word. The phrasing was calculated to sound dismissive without being overtly explosive, just enough to plant an idea in the viewer's mind, one he knew his supporters would seize and repeat. The reaction was immediate and fractured. From the far left side of the committee, a sharp inhale. From the Republican benches, a few muted chuckles. In the press gallery, pens froze mid-sentence. The cameras caught it all, the slight lift of his brow, the almost paternal tone, the faint shrug at the end like he'd just been stating the obvious. Crockett's gaze rose from her papers and fixed on him. The expression was flat, unblinking. She didn't shift in her seat, didn't reach for the microphone. Instead, her right hand pressed gently on the top page of her file, a slow, grounding gesture. The pause stretched. 10 seconds, maybe 12. Enough for Trump's smirk to deepen, as if her silence were proof the jab had landed. Enough for the audience at home to wonder if she'd let it slide. But Crockett wasn't quiet because she was shaken. She was quiet because she knew the insult had been his opening move, and she intended to let him think it had worked. The truth was, every beat of silence gave her more control. She could feel the room's attention narrowing, the air drawing tighter. When she finally leaned forward, it wasn't to answer the insult. It was to begin her questioning, slow, precise, and entirely on her terms. Asterisk in the weeks leading up to the hearing, Crockett had been a ghost in the media. No fiery cable news segments, no leaked sound bites, no public hints of what she was preparing. That silence wasn't disengagement. It was strategy. Every hour she'd spent away from the cameras had been spent in her cramped congressional office, surrounded by boxes of documents and the soft hum of a desk lamp burning past midnight. The file she brought into the chamber wasn't just paperwork. It was the product of weeks of sifting through thousands of pages. Financial disclosures, sworn depositions, visitor logs, email records, and obscure committee reports that most members never read past the cover page. Every line had been cross-referenced, every date matched against news footage and public statements. She'd learned a long time ago that power in a hearing came from the ability to drop something undeniable onto the table, something that didn't need interpretation, only recognition. Trump's public bravado had a pattern. She had studied it like a military strategist analyzing an opponent's battle history. He deflected with humor, escalated with insults, and always sought to control the pace of the exchange. The key was to break that rhythm, to force him into a moment where his own words contradicted themselves so cleanly that even his allies couldn't talk around it. Near the center of her file sat the crown jewel, a certified transcript from a deposition taken in March 2024. In it, Trump gave a detailed account of approving a $2.5 million transfer from campaign funds to a private consulting firm. He'd named the firm. He'd named the person who owned it. And he'd described the purpose. The problem and the leverage was that he had publicly denied ever approving such a transaction, both in interviews and in earlier committee testimony. Crockett kept the transcript buried halfway through the stack, not because she was hiding it, but because she wanted him to walk into it unprepared. She knew that the best traps in politics weren't sprung at the start. They were woven into the conversation so seamlessly that the target didn't see the noose tightening until the last moment. Now, in the bright heat of the hearing lights, she slid a single page from the top of the pile and laid it in front of her. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to. Her eyes stayed locked on Trump, her voice still calm, even warm. This was the moment where the ground under his feet would begin to shift, and he wouldn't even feel it at first. Behind her, a reporter scribbled a note. She's not here to spar. She's here to build the case. Asterisk. Crockett's voice cut through the chamber with the kind of measured clarity that made people lean forward without realizing it. Mr. Trump, she began, her tone more formal than confrontational. You've repeatedly stated under oath that you had no direct involvement in the allocation of certain campaign funds to private enterprises. Is that correct? He didn't hesitate. That's correct. I leave that to my people. Always have. He leaned back slightly, as if the question were routine. Beneath the weight of his concern. Without breaking eye contact, Crockett slid a document across the polished wood between them. The paper's movement caught the camera's lens, a visual hook for the millions watching at home. This, she said evenly, is your deposition from March 3rd, 2024, where you specifically approved a $2.5 million transfer from the campaign's general fund to a private consulting firm owned by your former chief of staff. You described the transaction in detail, including its purpose. Trump's jaw tightened just enough to be noticeable. I don't recall the specifics. You're mischaracterizing, She didn't interrupt. She let the denial hang in the air like smoke. The silence was strategic. It forced him to keep talking. "What I do know," he continued, "is that people twist my words all the time. This is another one of those situations." She reached for the deposition without looking down, flipping to a marked section. On page 47, line 8, you were asked, "Did you approve the transfer?" You answered, "Yes, I approved it. It was necessary. Those are your words, sir, not mine." A low murmur rolled through the press gallery. On the Republican side of the dais, one member's pen froze mid-note. The contradiction was clean, sharp, and visible to anyone with ears and eyes. Trump shifted forward now, no longer reclining, the smirk gone. "I'd have to see the context. You're welcome to read the entire transcript," she replied, sliding the rest of the document toward him. "But the statement is unambiguous." For the viewers at home, it was the first visible crack in his armor. Not a collapse, not yet, but enough to shift the perception of control. The exchange was no longer about her qualifications or his stage presence. It was about the facts in black and white, and the way they didn't match his words. Crockett leaned back slightly, letting the weight of the moment settle. She didn't need to gloat or press yet. The seed had been planted, and the cameras had caught the shift. Somewhere near the back of the chamber, a veteran political reporter whispered to a colleague, "That's the first nail. Watch what she does next." Asterisk, the air inside the committee chamber was thick with the scent of unease. Conversations died down as a faint echo of shuffling papers and clicking pens filled the space. Jasmine Crockett sat rigidly in her seat, her eyes fixed on Tucker Carlson, who had just finished another smug, evasive answer. He leaned back, lips curled in that familiar smirk, as if this entire process were a game, and he was winning. But Jasmine could feel the tide turning. She adjusted her microphone, her hands steady despite the storm in her chest. On the table before her lay a thick manila folder. Not just evidence, but the kind of evidence that could break through even Carlson's carefully cultivated wall of charm and half-truths. "Mr. Carlson," she began, her tone deceptively calm, "you've repeatedly denied having any direct involvement in the funding of certain political smear campaigns. But your emails tell a different story." A ripple of murmurs ran through the room. Carlson's smirk faltered, just a fraction, but enough for the cameras to catch it. Jasmine slid a sheet from the folder and held it up. The paper trembled slightly in her grasp, but not from fear, from the sheer energy coursing through her. "On January 14th, at 2:17 a.m., you sent this email to a Mr. Robert Hendricks, outlining not only the funding, but the narrative framing you intended to use. You even referred to it as, quote, the operation." Gasps. Reporters scribbled notes. Camera shutters clicked in rapid succession. Carlson shifted in his chair, leaning forward. "Congresswoman, please." Jasmine cut him off sharply, her voice rising just enough to command the room. "Do not insult the intelligence of this committee or the American people. The email is signed. It's your address. It matches the metadata. Are you going to sit here, on the record, and call this fabricated?" Carlson hesitated. The silence was heavier than any shouting match could have been. Then came the shift, that small, almost imperceptible moment when the power dynamics in a room flip. Carlson's shoulders pulled inward. His gaze darted not toward her, but toward his attorney, seated in the second row. Jasmine noticed. Everyone noticed. She pressed forward. "For weeks, you've painted yourself as a victim of political targeting. But the evidence shows you as an architect. You didn't just tell the story. You built it, and you profited from it." By now, the gallery was buzzing. Phones lit up as journalists live-tweeted every word. Outside the building, thousands of viewers were glued to live streams, watching in real time as the man who had always controlled the narrative lost his grip. Carlson opened his mouth to speak, but Jasmine raised her hand. You will have your turn. For now, I have more to present. She reached into the folder again, and this time, the contents would not just corner him, they would define the rest of the hearing. And in that moment, Tucker Carlson knew the turning point had arrived. And it wasn't in his favor. Asterisk, the courtroom was a pressure cooker, every tick of the clock adding heat to an already boiling atmosphere. The air seemed heavier as Elon Musk took the stand, his face a mask of studied calm. But the tension in his posture betrayed a readiness to parry whatever came next. He clasped his hands on the table, tapping his thumb against his knuckle in a rhythm that matched his restless mind. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters adjusted their microphones. The nation held its breath. Jasmine Crockett stood, her presence commanding not through volume, but through the weight of her gaze. She approached the podium slowly, each step deliberate, as though she was measuring the floor beneath her feet, and the ground Musk was standing on. Her first words were deceptively soft. Mr. Musk, you've made it clear you consider yourself a visionary. But today, I'm not asking about rockets or electric cars. I'm asking about the truth. Musk's brow furrowed slightly, but his lips curled into the faintest smirk. A man convinced he could dance around any trap. Jasmine didn't wait for him to respond. She lifted a thick folder, papers fanned out like playing cards in the hand of a skilled dealer. These, she said, are internal communications from your own executives, discussing the use of government, contracts and resources for projects unrelated to their stated purpose. Some of these were sent directly to you. Musk shifted slightly in his chair. Congresswoman, I receive thousands of emails a day. I can't be responsible for... She cut him off. You can be responsible for what you approved. And these aren't just emails. They're approvals with your signature. Tell me, Mr. Musk, did you or did you not sign off on the reallocation of taxpayer-funded satellite bandwidth for your private negotiations in the Middle East? The smirk faltered. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Musk glanced at his attorney, but the man's eyes remained locked on the table. I'd have to review the specifics, Musk replied carefully, each word chosen like a soldier avoiding a minefield. Jasmine's voice sharpened. Review them now. Exhibit 14. She slid a printed email across the table. That's your approval, time-stamped. And that's not a humanitarian mission. That's a commercial deal worth billions for you. Murmur ran through the gallery. The judge tapped her gavel, calling for order. Musk exhaled through his nose, the cool composure beginning to crack. The deal was mutually beneficial, not to the American taxpayer, Jasmine interjected. You turned a public resource into a private revenue stream. And when asked, you denied any misuse. That, Mr. Musk, is called lying under oath. The last sentence hit like a hammer. Musk's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. The silence in the courtroom wasn't just absence of sound. It was the heavy pause before something breaks. Judge leaned forward. Mr. Musk, you will answer the question directly. And in that moment, with the nation watching, Musk realized the game had shifted. This was no longer a battle of wit and charm. This was survival. Asterisk, the committee room had the heavy stillness of a church before a confession. Every person, senators, aides, journalists leaned forward in their seats, anticipating the clash that was about to unfold. For hours, the proceedings had followed the usual pattern. Arguments volleyed back and forth, interruptions flaring like sudden sparks, witnesses hedging their answers. But Jasmine Crockett had been biding her time, gathering each inconsistency, each slip of the tongue, like arrows to be drawn at just the right moment. Now, she adjusted her microphone, leaned in, and let the silence stretch long enough for the air to thicken. Mr. Carlson, she began, her tone deceptively mild, earlier today, you stated under oath that you have never coordinated directly with political operatives to shape your coverage. Correct? Tucker Carlson, seated just a few feet away, shifted in his chair. That's correct, he said, the words firm but just slightly too quick. Jasmine didn't blink. She pressed a small remote, and a screen behind her flickered to life. The image was unmistakable. A leaked email, dated and time-stamped, showing a direct exchange between Carlson and a senior political strategist. The subject line, talking points for tonight's broadcast. The room erupted in murmurs. Carlson's lawyer leaned toward him, whispering urgently, but Jasmine didn't give them time to regroup. Would you like to revise your statement, Mr. Carlson? She asked, her voice now like sharpened steel. Carlson tried to smile, but it came out tight and brittle. I don't recall that particular email, he said. Perhaps, Jasmine replied, tapping the remote again. Another slide appeared, not just one email, but dozens. Each one more explicit than the last, showing coordination that contradicted every word he had said under oath. Allow me to refresh your memory. Gasps rippled through the audience, and even the chair of the committee leaned forward, clearly caught off guard by the volume of evidence. Jasmine's eyes never left Carlson's. These communications, she continued, paint a clear picture of deliberate collaboration with political figures to mislead the public. And I have to wonder, Mr. Carlson, was this about reporting the truth or selling a narrative? Carlson opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His lawyer intervened, citing context and selective presentation, but it was too late. The momentum had shifted. The once unflappable media figure looked cornered, his confidence draining with each new exhibit Jasmine unveiled. And then came the real blow. Jasmine revealed that one of the emails contained not just talking points, but instructions to target specific individuals for defamation in coordination with a political campaign. It wasn't just about bias anymore. It was about deliberate harm. The gallery buzzed like a hive. Cameras clicked. The hearing was no longer just a political skirmish. It had become a public unmasking dot as the chairman banged the gavel to restore order. Jasmine sat back, her point made. She didn't need to say another word. The evidence spoke for itself. For the first time all day, Carlson avoided her gaze. The tide had turned, and everyone knew it. Asterisk, the courtroom seemed to constrict, as if the walls themselves were leaning, in to witness the duel unfolding at its center. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her blazer, her expression sharpened into a blade's edge. Across from her, J.D. Vance sat with his counsel, fingers tapping a faint, erratic rhythm on the polished mahogany table, a telltale sign that his earlier confidence was faltering. Judge Ramirez, presiding with her usual poised authority, looked over her glasses. Congresswoman Crockett, you may proceed. Jasmine stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the rhythm of inevitability. She paused in front of the witness stand, allowing the silence to settle into an oppressive weight before she spoke. Mr. Vance, she began, her voice calm but laced with the kind of precision that could dismantle a fortress brick by brick. Earlier, under direct questioning, you claimed that your statement, the one referring to a certain demographic as, quote, unfit for leadership, was taken out of context. Is that correct? Vance shifted in his seat. Yes, the media distorted my words. That's what they do. Jasmine tilted her head slightly, almost pitying him. Interesting. Because I have here. She raised a manila folder and, with deliberate slowness, withdrew a printed transcript. The full video transcript of that town hall meeting. Every word is here. No edits. No distortions. Would you like me to read your exact phrasing for the record? Vance's attorney leaned in to whisper something, but Jasmine continued, without waiting for a reply. She read aloud, her voice unflinching. They don't have the moral foundation to run a country. They were raised on dependency and failure. The words landed like a punch to the gut. A murmur rippled through the audience gallery, the sound quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Vance's jaw tightened. That was a direct quote? Jasmine interjected sharply. From your own mouth? In front of cameras and voters? He hesitated, then forced a smirk. It was political rhetoric, Miss Crockett. You wouldn't understand. Her eyes flashed, but her tone stayed ice cold. I understand plenty. What I don't understand is how a sitting senator can claim to represent all Americans while openly disparaging entire communities based on the circumstances of their birth. She turned slightly toward the jury, letting the weight of her words sink in. This isn't rhetoric. It's prejudice, dressed up as policy. Vance's counsel tried to object, but Judge Ramirez waved him off. Overruled. Continue. Jasmine stepped closer, closing the physical distance like a predator circling its prey. Tell us, Senator, do you believe your remarks were justified? For a moment the mask cracked. His eyes darted toward the gallery, scanning faces that were no longer nodding in agreement, but staring in quiet judgment. I misspoke, he muttered. Jasmine leaned in, her voice a whisper that still carried to every corner of the room. No, Senator. You spoke exactly what you believed. And now you're facing the truth in the eyes of the people you claim to serve. She stepped back, letting the silence condemn him more than any further question could. The judge's gavel came down again, but the damage was already done, not just to Vance's argument, but to the image he had fought so hard to preserve. Cross-examination was over, but the echoes of his own words lingered like an unshakable shadow. Asterisk. The air in the courtroom felt like glass, fragile, tense, one wrong word away from shattering. Every seat was taken, the press gallery a sea of poised pens and glowing camera lenses. Somewhere in the crowd, whispers carried like smoke, curling. Around the oak pillars and marble floors, the judge's gavel struck once, a hollow, resonant thud that silenced everything. Members of the jury, the judge intoned, have you reached a verdict? The jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a jaw set like steel, rose to her feet. The paper in her hands trembled not from fear, but from the awareness of history pressing down on her. We have, Your Honor. Every heartbeat in the room seemed to sync with the sound of her footsteps as she approached. Jasmine Crockett sat, perfectly still at her table, her chin slightly raised, eyes fixed on the foreman as if willing her to speak the truth. Across the aisle, the defense counsel shifted uncomfortably, their client pale and sweating. The foreman cleared her throat, her voice steady despite the weight of what she was about to say. In the matter of the charges brought against the defendant, we find she paused, and in that fraction of a second, the room inhaled as one, guilty on all counts. The words detonated in the silence. A ripple of reaction tore through the gallery. Gasps, muffled cries, even a sharp intake of breath from someone in the jury box. Jasmine didn't move at first. She just let the verdict hang in the air like the final note of a song. Then, slowly, she exhaled. Her pen rolled from her fingers onto the table, a small, metallic clink breaking her stillness. The defendants slumped, their shoulders collapsing inward, as though the words themselves had crushed their spine. Their lawyer placed a hand on their arm, whispering something that didn't seem to register. Reporters exploded into quiet, urgent frenzy, thumbs flying over phone screens, scribbling in notebooks, capturing the moment for headlines that would dominate the evening. The judge called for order, but even the gavel's sharp cracks couldn't fully tame the human tide of emotions flooding the room. When the noise ebbed enough to speak, the judge looked to Jasmine. Miss Crockett, the court thanks you for your service and diligence in this matter. She nodded once, her voice calm but resonant. The truth deserves its day. Today, it got it. Outside, The crowd had already begun to gather, their chants, and cheers echoing faintly through the walls. Jasmine knew that when she stepped out, the cameras would be waiting, the questions sharp, the spotlights blinding. But for now, she allowed herself a single, quiet moment in the stillness, absorbing the victory, feeling its weight, and bracing for what came next, because verdicts were not endings, they were beginnings. And this one would shake the nation. The courtroom was quieter now, not because the tension had eased, but because every person inside had realized the gravity of what was unfolding. The chatter of reporters had faded into an uneasy silence, cameras still poised, waiting for the next seismic shift. Jasmine Crockett sat forward in her chair, elbows resting on the polished wood of the counsel's table, her eyes fixed on J.D. Vance. For the past several hours, the hearing had been a battle of attrition statements, counterstatements, evasions, and a relentless probing of each weak spot in Vance's testimony. But now, something had shifted. Jasmine had just introduced a document, a single sheet of paper, into evidence. To the untrained eye, it seemed harmless. To Vance, it was a live grenade. This, Jasmine began, her voice low and deliberate, is an internal memo from your campaign's strategy team, dated 2 weeks before your ghetto trash comment went public. She lifted the page for the cameras to catch, the black and white text glowing under the overhead lights. And here is where it gets interesting. The judge leaned forward, curiosity in his eyes. Even the jurors, who had been struggling to mask their exhaustion, were now visibly alert. Jasmine walked toward the bench, her heels clicking like the steady tick of a countdown clock. It states, she continued, reading directly from the page, we will double down on cultural division narratives. Controversy drives engagement. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Mr. Vance, were you exploiting racial tension for political gain? Vance's jaw tightened. His counsel shifted uncomfortably, flipping through his own copies of the exhibits. That's not what that memo means, Vance muttered, his voice losing the steel it once carried. Jasmine's eyes narrowed. Then tell us, Senator, what does it mean? Because this looks less like a gaffe, and more like a calculated attack designed to inflame and divide. The murmur from the gallery was immediate. Reporters scribbled furiously, some already typing headlines on their phones, glanced at his attorney, but the silence between them was damning. Every second he didn't respond was another point for Jasmine in the court of public opinion. You've built a political career claiming to speak for the people. Jasmine pressed, her voice rising just enough to stir the air in the room. But here on paper, we see a strategy that treats people's struggles as tools, as bait for clicks and campaign donations. Do you deny it? The judge cleared his throat. Senator, you are required to answer. Vance's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, he shifted in his chair, eyes darting to the jurors, the cameras, and finally back to Jasmine. His silence spoke volumes. And in that moment, Jasmine knew this was the turning point, not just in the hearing, but in the narrative outside these walls. The man who had so confidently slung insults was now cornered, his own paper trail unraveling the image he had so carefully constructed. Jasmine stepped back, letting the silence linger a beat longer before returning to her seat. The damage was done, and she knew. It was irreversible. The Capitol felt different that morning, like the heavy clouds above Washington had taken a side. Outside, the steps were packed with reporters, protesters, and supporters, all pressed against the metal. Barricades. Signs waved in the air, half in outrage, half in solidarity. Somewhere in that chaotic blend of noise and color, the truth was preparing to find its voice. Inside the committee chamber, the tension was palpable. Cameras were already rolling, capturing every flicker of expression. Elon Musk sat at the witness, table, his posture more rigid than usual, his gaze darting toward the rows of press. The days of unflappable confidence had been replaced by something else, an awareness that the tide might be turning against him. Jasmine Crockett entered with the calm precision of a surgeon about to operate. She carried a single folder thin, but radiating the kind of weight that made even seasoned politicians shift in their seats. Her eyes locked on Musk's, not in hostility, but in the quiet assurance of someone who had prepared for this moment down to the last breath. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice even but edged with steel. "Over the course of these hearings, we've heard a lot of statements, many of them contradictory, about your dealings with federal contracts and your private communications with political figures. Today, we will cut through the noise." She slid a document across the table. The large overhead screen lit up with an email header. The room stirred. It was a direct exchange between Musk and a senior government liaison, one that contradicted his earlier testimony. Musk leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "That's taken out of context," he said quickly, the defensive sharpness in his tone cutting through the chamber's stillness. Jasmine didn't flinch. "The context," she said, "is precisely why we're here. You told this committee, under oath, that no such arrangement existed. But this," she tapped the screen with her pen, "proves otherwise." The murmurs in the room swelled. Committee members exchanged glances. The press gallery buzzed like a hive struck with a stick. Musk shifted tactics. "Congresswoman Crockett, this is political theater. You're trying to build a narrative, not reveal facts." Jasmine's lips curved, not into a smile, but into something sharper, a controlled flicker of satisfaction. "If this is theater, Mr. Musk, then the audience is the American people, and the script is written by your own words. We didn't invent this story, you did." Her closing questions were methodical, boxing him in with timelines, signatures, and cross-reference testimony until his responses grew shorter, tighter. For the first time since the hearings began, Musk seemed aware that the ground beneath him wasn't solid dot. As she finished, the chair banged the gavel. The session adjourned, but the room didn't exhale. Reporters rushed toward the exits, already drafting headlines in their minds. Jasmine stood still for a moment, the weight of victory measured not in applause, but in the quiet certainty that the truth had finally shifted the current dot outside. The crowd's roar greeted her. The tide had turned, and this time it was on her side. The packed courtroom seemed to hold its breath, as if the very air understood the gravity of the moment. Outside, the chants of protesters still echoed faintly through the marble halls, their voices a reminder that the trial's impact had long spilled beyond the confines of these four walls. Inside, every eye was locked on the jury box. The jurors, 12 ordinary citizens, now burdened with an extraordinary judgment, sat in solemn stillness. Some clutched their hands together, knuckles white. Others stared at the floor, avoiding the gaze of either party. Judge Whitmore's voice cut through the tension, steady but edged with weight. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" A middle-aged woman in a navy blazer rose from her seat. She held the folded paper in trembling hands. "We have, Your Honor." The bailiff took the slip, passing it to the judge. Whitmore read it silently first, his jaw tightening, almost imperceptibly. Then, with the precision of a scalpel, he spoke. "In the matter of the United States versus Elon Musk on the charge of misuse of government resources, the jury finds the defendant guilty." A collective gasp rippled through the room. On the prosecution's side, Jasmine Crockett sat frozen for a heartbeat before allowing herself the faintest nod. The ruling wasn't just a win, it was validation that truth, however embattled, still had the power to prevail. Musk, on the other hand, stared straight ahead, his expression an inscrutable mask. His legal team immediately leaned in, whispering, furiously about appeals and procedural angles. But for the first time since the trial began, the billionaire's confidence seemed dented. The weight of the word guilty hung over him like a shadow he couldn't escape. Judge Whitmore continued. On the charge of perjury before Congress, the jury finds the defendant not guilty. The second verdict landed like a counterpunch. It wasn't a clean sweep for Crockett, but the core charge, the one that could lead to severe penalties, was secured. The gallery erupted in a mixture of cheers and outrage until the judge's gavel brought it back to uneasy quiet dot as the jury was dismissed. Jasmine's mind ran not to victory celebrations, but to the long road ahead. She knew the headlines would be explosive, the online discourse vicious. She could already picture the hashtags, some hailing her as a hero, others branding her a political assassin. When court adjourned, she walked past Musk without looking at him, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. But as she reached the heavy wooden doors, she paused. Turning her head just enough, she said in a voice meant for him alone, "This wasn't about me winning. It was about the truth catching up." Outside, the press swarmed like a storm. Microphones thrust toward her, cameras flashing, questions hurled from every direction. She didn't answer them yet. For a moment, she simply stood on the courthouse steps, feeling the late afternoon sun on her face. The fight wasn't over, but today she had struck a blow that would echo far beyond Washington. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the internet and the loud streets of protest, the aftershock had already begun. The sun had dipped low over the Capitol, casting long shadows across the marble steps and stone columns. Outside, a restless crowd had swelled to fill the plaza, supporters cheering, opponents shouting, reporters capturing every angle of the historic moment. Social media was ablaze. Clips of Jasmine Crockett delivering her testimony, headlines highlighting the verdict, and viral threads dissecting every word and gesture from the hearing. The story had exploded beyond Washington, reaching living rooms, phones, and news feeds across the nation. Inside the courthouse, Jasmine gathered her papers and slowly descended the steps. Her team flanked her, faces still taut with the adrenaline of hours of high-stakes confrontation. She walked with measured grace, aware that every camera lens, every smartphone, every pair of eyes on her path was recording not just a congresswoman, but a symbol of accountability. Journalists shouted questions, but she didn't flinch. She answered only once, her voice steady, resonant with quiet authority. Truth always finds its way. That's what we fought for today. The weight of the day pressed on her shoulders, yet there was a clarity to it, a satisfaction that came not from triumph over a single adversary, but from exposing a pattern of deceit and corruption. Each step down the courthouse steps reinforced the sense that justice, slow and deliberate, had finally landed a blow. Meanwhile, inside Elon Musk's offices, the mood was starkly different. Counselors argued over legal strategies, aides scrubbed press statements, and Musk himself sat in stunned silence, scrolling through headlines that dissected his testimony and the evidence he had failed to counter convincingly. The very tools he had once wielded, media influence, public perception, rapid messaging, now amplified his missteps. He had underestimated Crockett's meticulous preparation and her ability to leverage facts into a narrative that no spin could. Undue. Across the country, citizens debated the hearings with passion and intensity. News segments replayed every viral moment. The calm precision of Jasmine's questioning, the exposure of contradictions, the undeniable proof laid bare in committee documents. It wasn't just a political spectacle. It was a cultural reckoning. Back on the Capitol steps, Jasmine paused for a brief reflection. She allowed herself the faintest smile, knowing that poetic justice had been served. The arrogance, the calculated disrespect, and the attempts to undermine her authority had all backfired spectacularly. Today's outcome was proof that preparation, patience, and unwavering commitment to truth could prevail over even the most powerful figures. As she walked toward her car, cameras following, reporters trailing, and the crowd's roar echoing behind her, Jasmine understood the resonance of the moment. It would ripple through political discourse for weeks, shaping how public figures approached transparency and accountability. And in that realization, she felt a rare, profound sense of closure. The insult meant to humiliate her had instead revealed her strength and exposed the very vulnerability of those who believed they were untouchable. Justice, it seemed, had its own way of speaking. The evening sky over Washington glowed with a fading amber, casting long contemplative shadows across the Capitol steps. Jasmine Crockett paused for a moment at the edge of the plaza, letting the city's hum wash over her. Reporters were still buzzing in the distance, cameras clicking, drones hovering, and phones streaming live feeds into millions of living rooms. The nation had watched every step of the confrontation, every moment of truth laid bare, and the verdict had already begun to reverberate across political discourse. She looked back toward the courthouse, the grand marble pillars now quiet in their stoic permanence. Inside, the echoes of the day's high-stakes hearings lingered, the sharp intakes of breath, the rustle of documents, the subtle shifts in posture of those who thought themselves untouchable. Jasmine could still feel the tension in the air, the almost tangible electricity that had pulsed every time she presented incontrovertible evidence. Each calculated word, each pause, had built a crescendo that now left an indelible mark, not just on the individuals involved, but on the very idea of accountability in public office. Her mind drifted briefly to the millions watching at home, viewers who had seen not just a political skirmish, but a demonstration of integrity, poise, and the power of preparation. They had witnessed the transformation of raw insult into a platform for truth. The personal attacks meant to humiliate her had become the catalyst for a nationwide conversation about honesty, responsibility, and the moral obligations of leadership. Even as the city lights flickered on, painting the streets in golden reflections, Jasmine felt the weight of her responsibility, not just to the present moment, but to history. This wasn't merely a victory in a courtroom or a committee chamber. It was a testament to the principle that power is accountable when confronted with courage and facts. She knew the story would live on in headlines, social media threads, and countless conversations, shaping perceptions far beyond the confines of this day. A gentle breeze carried with it the faint sounds of distant chants and applause from supporters lingering outside. Jasmine allowed herself a quiet, inward smile. The journey had been exhausting, fraught with tension, and morally complex. But it had been necessary. Every step, every question, every unflinching confrontation had brought her to this moment of quiet affirmation. As she turned to leave the plaza, heading toward the car that would take her back to the rhythm of daily life, she reflected on the broader truth of what had occurred, that dignity, strategy, and unwavering commitment to the facts could turn even the harshest attacks into instruments of justice. The nation had witnessed it firsthand, and history would remember it not as a fleeting spectacle, but as a moment when one determined congresswoman transformed insult into a lasting testament to integrity. And as the doors of the car closed behind her, Jasmine knew one thing with absolute certainty. The fight for truth never ends. But today, the scales had finally tipped in favor of justice. The following morning, the nation woke to a storm of headlines. Cable networks ran continuous coverage, dissecting every moment of Jasmine Crockett's testimony and the explosive evidence she had presented. Newspapers featured front-page analyses of the hearings, with bold type screaming about accountability, deception, and the unexpected unraveling of a figure long considered untouchable. Social media platforms lit up in real time, clips of Jasmine's calm precision, her unyielding questions, and the reactions of those caught in her crosshairs went viral within minutes. Inside the Capitol, staffers whispered in hallways, comparing notes and replaying segments of the hearing on their phones. Even seasoned lawmakers, typically numb to political theater, acknowledged the magnitude of the events. Conversations that once skirted around ethics now confronted it head-on. Across committee rooms and offices, the day's testimony had become a reference point, a benchmark for how scrutiny and evidence could decisively shape public perception. Meanwhile, Jasmine's phone buzzed relentlessly. Messages of support, gratitude, and even astonishment poured in from constituents, colleagues, and journalists. Alike, she read each one quietly, letting the words settle not for ego, but to understand the broader impact of what had just transpired. People were talking, debating, questioning, and most importantly, thinking critically. The narrative had shifted, and her role in that shift was unmistakable. Back in private offices, political strategists scrambled. Those who had underestimated Jasmine now recalculated their approaches. The realization was clear. Her combination of meticulous preparation, calm authority, and moral clarity had created a template for accountability that could no longer be ignored. It wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a national reckoning. Jasmine, for her part, remained composed. She knew that headlines fade, but principles endure. She reflected on the hours spent combing through documents, the strategic pauses in questioning, and the careful orchestration of every piece of evidence. The power of truth had been amplified not by anger or theatrics, but by precision, patience, and relentless integrity. Outside, the Capitol grounds were alive with renewed civic energy. Citizens gathered to discuss what they had seen, to debate the implications, and to demand similar accountability from others in positions of power. Jasmine watched from her car as a small group of supporters cheered, holding signs that read, "Truth wins, and integrity matters." She allowed herself a brief, rare smile. The fight wasn't over, but today had proven that courage backed by facts could shift the course of public discourse. As she drove away, the weight of the morning pressed lightly on her shoulders. The country was watching, history was taking notes, and the ripple effect of her work would resonate far beyond the walls of the committee chamber. The insult meant to silence her had instead sparked a reckoning that no power, wealth, or influence could easily contain. And in that realization, Jasmine understood something profound. Justice, once pursued with clarity and courage, has a way of echoing far beyond its origin, shaping the conscience of a nation. The atmosphere in the Capitol was electric, a living tension that seemed to vibrate through every corridor, chamber, and committee room. Weeks of hearings, revelations, and cross-examinations had built to this moment, a final session designed to address the remaining questions, clarify the record, and confront the parties one last time. Every camera in the room was trained on Jasmine Crockett, who entered with the same measured confidence that had defined her from the beginning. She carried no folder this time, only her presence, sharpened by days of relentless preparation and moral clarity. Donald Trump, seated at the witness table, appeared composed, but the subtle flickers of unease betrayed the cracks in his usual bravado. He knew that the previous sessions had eroded public trust and exposed him to national scrutiny. His legal team whispered hurriedly at his side, but Jasmine paid them no mind. She had eyes only for the truth, and the country watching depended on her clarity. "Mr. Trump," she began, voice calm but charged with authority, "you've had the opportunity to respond to every allegation, every piece of evidence presented over these past weeks. Now, I want you to answer one question. Do you recognize the impact of your actions, not just on individuals, but on the credibility of public office itself?" The room held its breath. Trump opened his mouth, paused, and then gave a practiced smile. I think people are overreacting. The media. Jasmine held up her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. I'm not asking the media. I'm asking you. The documents, the communications, the testimony, this is public record. You cannot rewrite it, deny it, or spin it away. Do you take responsibility? A flicker of hesitation crossed his face. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that fills a room with expectation and moral weight. Reporters leaned forward. Every mic picked up the faintest intake of breath. Even the seasoned legal counsel looked unsettled. You see, Jasmine continued, her voice steady but sharp, when public figures use their power to humiliate, manipulate, or mislead, they erode the trust that citizens place in the institutions. Meant to serve them, accountability is not personal. It is fundamental. Trump exhaled slowly, visibly weighed by the words. He offered a non-committal nod, a subtle acknowledgement of the consequences he could not avoid. The courtroom tension didn't dissipate. Instead, it shifted, like a pendulum finally settling into balance. As the session concluded, Jasmine gathered her papers and rose. Cameras followed, capturing her every measured step. Outside, the nation awaited her statement. Her words delivered, with quiet authority, carried beyond the marble walls, into living rooms, social media feeds, and the consciousness of a public that had witnessed both confrontation and accountability. Truth has been tested, power has been challenged, and the principles of our democracy have prevailed. The final gavel echoed through the chamber, signaling the end of the confrontation, but the beginning of a lasting legacy. Jasmine Crockett had turned and attempted humiliation into a moment of national reckoning, leaving no doubt that courage, preparation, and moral clarity could hold even the most powerful accountable.